On a morning when the kingdom had begun to lose all hope, a new figure appeared at the palace gates. Unlike the elaborate processions of previous healers, this man arrived alone, on foot, carrying nothing but a simple leather bag and a walking staff carved with symbols that seemed to shift when looked at directly. He called himself Adoni, and he claimed to be a hunter from the deep forest, the ancient woodland that stretched beyond the kingdom's borders, where few dared to venture and fewer still returned. Adoni was not an impressive man to look at. He was of medium height and build, with skin weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were simple leather and rough cloth, practical garments for forest living. His most striking feature were his eyes, pale green, like forest pools, and so calm they seemed almost lifeless. But there was something about him that made the palace guards step aside without question. Something that made the court advisors listen when he spoke. "I have heard of the princess's affliction," he said to King Taiwo, his voice quiet, but carrying clearly through the throne room. "I possess knowledge of the old healing ways, passed down through generations of forest dwellers. I can restore her sight and hearing, but I will need 3 days alone with her to perform the necessary rituals." King Taiwo studied the humble hunter carefully. After so many failures, he had grown suspicious of grand promises and elaborate presentations. But there was something in this man's calm certainty that was different from all the others. "What do you want in return?" the king asked. "Only what you have already promised, her hand in marriage and a place in your family." That should have been the first warning sign. No previous healer had asked for the full reward before proving their ability. Most had requested gold or jewels first, with the greater rewards to be discussed only if they succeeded. But Adoni spoke as if his hearing was already assured. Kande, standing beside the princess's chair, felt that familiar chill run down her spine. There was something about this man that reminded her of her grandfather's warnings about forest magic. Powerful, yes, but wild and unpredictable, often carrying costs that weren't apparent until it was too late to change course. But King Taiwo was a desperate father watching his beloved daughter waste away in darkness and silence. He gave his consent. What happened during those 3 days would remain a mystery to everyone except Princess Ladi and the forest hunter, Adoni. The princess was moved to a chamber in the palace's oldest tower, a room that had been sealed for generations until now. Adoni requested that no one disturb them and that no one attempt to enter the chamber until the 3 days had passed. But Kande couldn't shake her growing sense of dread. On the first night, she crept close to the tower and pressed her ear to the stone walls. At first, she heard nothing, which was expected since the chamber had been sealed to contain sound. But as the night wore on, she began to sense something else. A vibration in the very stones, a rhythm like a heartbeat, but far too slow and deep to be human. On the second night, the sensation was stronger. The entire tower seemed to pulse with an energy that made Kande's teeth ache and her vision blur. She noticed that birds avoided flying near the tower, and even the palace cats refused to hunt mice in its shadow. On the third night, the energy peaked. Kande watched from her window as strange lights flickered in the tower room, not the warm glow of oil lamps or candles, but cold, shifting illuminations that cast no shadows and seemed to bend reality around them. And then, just before dawn, everything went silent. When the 3 days had passed, Adoni emerged from the tower chamber and requested an audience with King Taiwo. His appearance was unchanged. He showed no signs of exhaustion or strain from whatever rituals he had performed. In fact, he seemed more energetic than before, as if the work had somehow strengthened him. "It is done," he announced simply. "Princess Ladi's sight and hearing have been restored." The entire court held its breath as Princess Ladi was brought from the chamber. For a moment, she stood in the doorway, blinking against the light. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. The first genuine smile anyone had seen from her since the curse had struck. "Father," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I can see you, I can hear you, the nightmare is over." The joy in the throne room was indescribable. King Taiwo wept openly as he embraced his daughter. Courtiers cheered and applauded. Even the usually stoic palace guards smiled with relief. After months of despair, their princess had been returned to them. But Kande noticed something others missed in their celebration. Princess Ladi's eyes, while they could clearly see, held a strange quality, as if she was looking at everything through water, or as if she was seeing things that others couldn't see. And when she spoke, there was occasionally a slight delay, as if she was listening to something else before responding. More troubling still was Aduni's reaction to his success. While everyone else celebrated, the forest hunter watched Princess Ladi with the satisfied expression of someone who had acquired a valuable possession. There was no joy in his pale green eyes, no pride in his achievement, only ownership. True to his word, King Taiwo immediately began preparations for the wedding between Princess Ladi and her savior. The ceremony was set for the new moon, just 1 week away. It would be a grand celebration, with guests invited from all the neighboring kingdoms to witness the union that had grown from tragedy to triumph. Princess Ladi, while grateful for her restoration, struggled with the reality of her situation. She had been raised to eventually marry for political alliance, but she had always imagined choosing her own husband from amongst suitable princes. Now, she found herself bound by honor and her father's promise to wed a man she barely knew. Still, she told herself, any fate was better than eternal darkness and silence. Aduni made no attempt to court her in the traditional sense. He spent his days in the palace gardens or library, studying books about the kingdom's history and resources, with the attention of someone conducting an inventory rather than a man learning about his future home. When Princess Ladi tried to engage him in conversation about their future together, his responses were polite but distant. He spoke of taking her to his home in the deep forest, describing it as a place of great beauty and ancient power where she would want for nothing. "Will we have children?" she asked during one of their brief conversations. Aduni's pale green eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Oh yes, princess, there will be children, many children. My home is full of the sounds of youth and new life." Something about the way he said it made Princess Ladi's restored hearing pick up an undertone that chilled her blood. But the wedding preparations continued. Seamstresses worked day and night on a gown of white silk embroidered with threads of gold. Musicians practiced songs of celebration. Cooks prepared for a feast that would feed hundreds of guests. And through it all, Kende watched with growing unease. Her grandfather's teachings echoed in her memory. Magic always has a price, child, and the greater the magic, the greater the price. When someone offers to heal what cannot be healed, ask yourself, where does that power come from and what does it truly cost? 2 days before the wedding, Kende made a decision that would save her princess's life, though she didn't know it yet. Unable to shake her suspicions about Adoni, she began to investigate his background. She spoke quietly with merchants who traded near the forest borders, with hunters who occasionally ventured into the deep woods, with the oldest women in the kingdom who remembered stories from their grandmother's time. What she discovered made her blood turn to ice. The deep forest, it seemed, was home to more than just wild animals and rare herbs. Ancient stories spoke of a powerful sorcerer who lived in its heart, a man who had discovered how to extend his own life by stealing the life force of others. The stories said he appeared as different people at different times, but always as someone humble and helpful, someone who offered solutions to desperate problems. And always, the stories said, he collected payment in the form of young women who would become his wives. Though what happened to these women was never spoken of in detail, only whispered about in the darkest terms. The oldest woman Kende spoke with, an ancient grandmother whose eyes had grown cloudy with age, but whose memory remained sharp, clutched Kende's hand with surprising strength. "Child," she whispered, "my own grandmother told me of such a man. She called him the Hunter of Hearts, because he collected women like trophies, keeping them in his forest home until their beauty and life force were used up. Then they would disappear, and he would seek new prey." The pieces of the terrible puzzle began to fall into place. Kende realized that Adoni's healing of Princess Ladi wasn't an act of kindness or even simple greed for royal reward. It was the action of a predator who had found the perfect prey, a princess whose beauty was legendary, whose royal blood would provide particularly potent life force, and whose father was so grateful he would hand her over without question. But what truly terrified Kende was the realization that she might already be too late. The wedding was in 2 days, and once Princess Ladi left the kingdom with her new husband, she would disappear into the deep forest where no rescue would be possible. That night, Kende made a choice that would determine both their fates. She crept into the old storage rooms below the palace, searching through trunks and boxes that hadn't been opened in decades. She was looking for something specific, the magical artifacts that had belonged to her grandfather, items that had been placed in royal storage after his death, but never thrown away, out of respect for his years of faithful service. Finally, in a cedar chest wrapped with protective cloth, she found what she needed: her grandfather's medicine bag, still containing the tools and talismans he had used in his practice of the healing arts. But more importantly, she found his journal, filled with his own handwriting, detailing every magical technique he had learned, including those specifically designed to combat dark sorcery. As Kende opened the journal, she felt her grandfather's presence around her like a warm embrace. The pages contained not just spells and rituals, but wisdom about the nature of magic itself. Her grandfather had written, "The power of light always exceeds the power of darkness, child, but only if the person wielding it has the courage to sacrifice everything for those they love." Kende understood that she was about to face a test that would require not just magical knowledge, but the willingness to risk her own life for Princess Ladi's salvation. And in 2 days, when Princess Ladi left for her new home in the deep forest, Kende would be ready. Dawn broke grey and ominous over the kingdom of Kush on Princess Ladi's wedding day. The sky was heavy with clouds that seemed to swirl in unnatural patterns, and the birds that usually sang morning songs remained silent in their roosts. But inside the palace, no one noticed these dark omens. They were all too focused on the grand celebration that would supposedly mark the end of their princess's suffering. Princess Ladi stood before her mirror as Kende helped her into the elaborate white gown. The silk felt cold against her skin despite the warm morning air, and the golden threads seemed to dim rather than gleam in the lamplight. "Kende," Princess Ladi said quietly, studying her reflection with eyes that could now see but somehow looked different than before. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" Kende's hands stilled on the delicate buttons she was fastening. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when she would have to reveal what she had discovered about Adoni, knowing that her princess might not believe her. But before she could speak, a knock at the door interrupted them. "Princess," came a servant's voice, "your betrothed has sent word. He wishes to depart for his home immediately after the ceremony. The wedding feast will have to be brief." Princess Ladi frowned. "Immediately? But surely we should spend at least a few days here, allowing me to say proper goodbyes." "He says the forest journey requires daylight. He cannot risk traveling those paths after dark." Kende felt ice forming in her veins.
Her grandfather's journal had been very specific about dark sorcerers and their relationship with daylight. They could tolerate it, but they drew their strength from darkness. Adoni's insistence on departing before nightfall wasn't about safety. It was about getting Princess Ladi away from the palace before anyone could interfere with his plans. As the servant's footsteps faded down the corridor, Kende made her decision. "Princess Ladi, you must not go with him," she said, her voice urgent but quiet. "Adoni is not what he appears to be. He is—" The door opened without a knock. Adoni stood in the doorway, his pale green eyes taking in the scene with the calculating gaze of a predator. He had moved so silently that neither woman had heard his approach. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice carrying that same calm certainty that had impressed King Taiwo. "Of course not," Princess Ladi replied, though her voice carried a slight tremor. "We were just finishing the preparations." Adoni's gaze shifted to Kende, and for a moment, the servant felt as if those pale eyes could see straight through to her soul. "And you, faithful Kende, will be accompanying us to our new home, won't you? I understand you've served the royal family for generations." The way he said served made it sound like imprisonment. "Yes," Kende replied carefully. "I go wherever Princess Ladi goes." "How loyal," Adoni said, and something in his tone made both women's skin crawl. He stepped closer to Princess Ladi, and as he did, Kende noticed that Princess Ladi's restored sight seemed to waver slightly, her eyes losing focus for just a moment, as if she was seeing something that wasn't quite there. The healing hadn't been complete restoration. It had been magical manipulation, keeping Princess Ladi partially under Adoni's control. "I'll see you at the ceremony, my dear," Adoni said, taking Princess Ladi's hand and raising it to his lips.
Where his mouth touched her skin, Kande could swear she saw a brief flash of darkness, like a shadow passing beneath the surface. After he left, Princess Ladi stood motionless for several moments, staring at her hand. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "See what, Princess?" "For just a moment, I thought I saw something else. Something that wasn't Adoni at all, but..." She shook her head. "No, that's impossible. The curse must have affected my mind more than I realized." But Kande knew better. Princess Ladi's true sight was fighting against the magical manipulation, giving her glimpses of Adoni's real nature. The wedding ceremony took place in the palace's great courtyard, under a canopy of silk that snapped and fluttered in the increasingly strong wind. The assembled guests, nobles from across the kingdom and representatives from neighboring lands, watched with expressions of joy mixed with unease. Something about the day felt wrong, though most couldn't put their finger on what. King Taiwo stood proudly beside his daughter, but Kande noticed that his face had grown pale during the ceremony. As the ancient words of binding was spoken, the king seemed to age before their eyes, as if some vital force were being drained from him. The priest conducting the ceremony was an old man who had performed royal weddings for decades, but his voice shook as he spoke the traditional vows. More than once, he stumbled over words he knew by heart, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. But it was the moment of final binding that revealed the true horror of what was happening. As Princess Ladi and Adoni joined hands for the concluding ritual, a wind rose from nowhere, howling through the courtyard with a sound like screaming voices. The silk canopy tore loose from its moorings and whipped through the air like a living thing. In that moment of chaos, with fabric and debris swirling around them, Princess Ladi's magically enhanced vision saw through Adoni's disguise completely. What she saw was not a humble forest hunter, but something ancient and terrible. His true form was tall and gaunt, with skin like old parchment and eyes that held the accumulated malice of centuries. His mouth was filled with teeth that were too sharp and too many, and his fingers ended in claws that had been stained black by unimaginable deeds. Princess Ladi screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut through the wind like a blade. But when the debris settled and the wind died as suddenly as it had risen, Aduni appeared normal again, and everyone assumed her scream had been caused by the sudden storm. "Just wedding nerves," Aduni said, with false concern, his arm around Princess Ladi's waist in a grip that looked protective but felt like iron shackles. By ancient law and magic, they were now bound as husband and wife.